So where did we leave off? Hi everyone, my name is Jackie. Welcome back. We are enjoying life's journey. So I made a video a few weeks ago about things to think about or things to know before you start looking at property or land to purchase. So if you're new here, welcome. We purchased 41 acres of raw land in northern Arizona last year. So in that other video, I talked about things to think about before you purchase, and I was just about to get into how the whole buying process went, how we found the property, how much did it cost, how did we come up with the money, and all of that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the very tail end of that video, I mentioned the first place and pretty much the only place I went to actually start looking online for property was Zillow.com. I don't know why I like that website as much as I do, but I think it's easy to navigate and it's the one that I use to find our property. Now, I've been keeping an eye on the market, keeping an eye on property for quite a while. I'd say I've wanted property for at least 10 years. So every once in a while, I would just Google land for sale in Arizona or property for sale in Arizona. And one of those options that pop up would be Zillow. So I would go to Zillow and I would only have the filter on there for land. I wouldn't have anything for any houses. Now, if you went back to my first video and say you asked yourself some questions, you might have some other filters within there determining what you're looking for. But for me, I just left it simple with just land in Arizona. And then I prefer to look at Zillow through what's called their map view. And the reason I did that is because some of the research or things that you would do before looking at property is finding out what type of zoning and things that you are wanting to live in or you don't want to deal with. And I had mentioned that there was about 3 areas in Arizona, 1 in the south and 2 in the north, that had the least amount of zonings or least amount of restrictions. So those were the areas that I was going to be looking at. I excluded the south right away. And then the other 2 were kind of based off of climate and also based on distance from where we currently live. Now, we chose to purchase property. This is off-grid property. We do plan on living on this property full time, but it's more of a retirement retreat kind of future building plan as opposed to sell everything we own and go move on there right now. So when I was on Zillow, I would zoom into the area that I was trying to look at, and that gave me an idea of pricing. Now, you can do some filters and say you're like, I just want something that's, 2 to 5 acres, or I just want, or I want something like us, like I want 40 acres, I want 50 acres, whatever it is. I left the acreage open because I just wanted to see what was out there. So that's what I did throughout the year. So in our particular area, as of right now, our size property is selling for close to $70,000. We did not pay $70,000 for our property. At the time, we purchased our property in March of 2024. The properties of our size were going between $40,000 and $50,000. So we had to start thinking ahead of time, how are we going to do it? Were we going to save up 20% down and then finance the rest? Were we going to do an owner financing? Were we going to try to get the money somewhere else? How much money did we really think we could afford? So these were little questions in the back of our mind, but we didn't actually have the answers to them quite yet, which I recommend you guys have those answers before we did. But I started looking, and then I noticed that there would be some that were cheaper, maybe $30,000, $35,000, $40,000, and that's because these were owners who wanted cash only. So then you have to ask yourself, are you able to do cash only? Do you have 30 grand in the bank, or is there a way for you to come up with 30 grand that could be used as cash towards putting something down. So these were the price ranges then. Like I said, now the price ranges are about 70,000. So now we would not be able to afford anything. And a few years ago, the prices were higher as well. So that's why it might be a little bit of a journey, a long waiting period, as the markets go up and down, depending on what you would consider being way overpriced or just about right. So the second thing that I did was I started looking into the properties that were anywhere from 30 to 50,000. That's where I was like, I felt like that was maybe a comfortable spot. I wasn't going to go over 50,000, and anything below that was land that was maybe a little bit smaller in the size that I was looking at. Now, originally we thought 2 acres would be amazing, but everywhere that we started to look, we noticed would be in a more restricted area. Then I thought, well, 5 acres would be cool. Well, when I saw these acres that were 20 acres, 30 acres, 40 acres for only like $40,000, I thought, what a steal. Like that's really great. These are like some good numbers. So I started getting more serious about it. The things I looked for in the listing. Number one, pictures. You want pictures of that property, not just some weird, satellite view of it that anyone can get from Google Maps or Google Earth. You want actual pictures showing that somebody physically went to that property and had, boots on the ground, and they're taking pictures of this property, the property. So this particular one, I had my list in mind that I talked about before. We wanted trees, we wanted some type of water, whether it was seasonal or not. We wanted hills or some type of mountains. We wanted, something that wasn't just a flat, open, bare grassland. We wanted something that was a little bit more, and we wanted something up north, so we would have a little bit of change in the temperature. So it is about 20 degrees cooler up where our property is versus where we are down in the valley. So we wanted a place that we could go to. So the area I was looking at was that perfect area. I had actually gone on the map and figured out what county it was. So I went on the county website. That's how I kind of learned about the restrictions, and I learned about the coding, the zoning, what was that area zoned for, and things like that. So pictures, you want lots of pictures, but you also want to see if somewhere on the listing, if they have the parcel number, because then you take that parcel number and you can go on the county website and you can look up that parcel. You can see the history of ownership on there. You can see on their map, they have a GIS mapping system. Most counties, or at least here in Arizona, most of our counties have some type of mapping system. So you can actually see the outline of that parcel. Ours happens to be almost a square, not a perfect square, but almost a square. And then you can zoom in and see if there are other buildings or houses, or seems like your neighbor is collecting a junkyard or whatnot. And then you can also refer that as you get a general idea of where the area is at. You can refer that onto your Google Maps. I prefer to use Google Earth because they have the 3D version. So from there, I plug in my parcel number, and I see on there there's no liens on the property. So, somebody's not trying to collect on that property. There's no money owed. The taxes have been paid. You can see who the owners are, things like that. See if it's changed ownership a lot. Find out, have a general sense of why are they selling it. And then you can look at it on Google Earth in the 3D view and see what the ridges and the bumps and the curves and the texture of the property is like before you ever even go look at it. The other thing in the listing that you're looking for, besides just pictures and your parcel information, is the realtor type information. Now, one thing I didn't mention, I believe in the other video, was are you going to use your own realtor? We did not use a personal realtor. But in the description, there was a realtor, a listing realtor for the seller, and it was a cash only situation. So they wanted cash only, and that's why it was actually priced at about $35,000 or $37,000, somewhere around there is what it was priced at. And so it was lower than the rest because it was cash only, and they didn't have to deal with somebody coming up with financing, or they weren't going to finance it, like a owner financing. So you get a little bit of a cheaper deal there. But what I did was I located that realtor in that listing, and I went and saw if they had a website. So these are researching things that you're doing once you find that property, and you're like, hey, yeah, let me see and look more into here, because I've looked at the parcel information and the map online, and I'm interested. I'm a little more interested in this property. Let me see if this seems like it's legit and that this is a legit realtor. And they did happen to have their own website. It's a little mom and pop type thing. But he had his MLS listings on his website, which only realtors can get. So that was proof to me that this was a legit realtor. In the listing, it had mentioned that there would be a commission, a 5% commission going to the buyer realtor. So we weren't using a realtor. So I used that when it came down to calculating how much I was going to offer on the property. But before we did anything, after I did that little bit of research online, my husband and I drove and physically went and looked at the property. I mentioned it's 41 acres. We only made it around maybe 10 acres, and we were like, this is it. This is the property. We wanted something that was remote. All the roads, once you get off the highway, are dirt roads. They're not maintained by the county or anything like that. They are maintained by property owners. Every parcel has road easements in their deeds, so you legally have a road easement to your property. Ours had never been created, though, because the seller lived in a different state who had never made it to the actual property. So they had most likely had it as a investment type property. The reason he was eager to sell, unfortunately, his wife had passed away, but I got that information from the realtor, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second here. But so we drove down to the property. So we knew, okay, the distance to drive here was about 2.5 hours of driving, and then another half hour of driving on dirt roads. And when it's muddy over there, it's really, really bumpy and crazy. And then our particular property has a lot of rocks and ridges, so you really need a high clearance 4-wheel drive vehicle and really good thick tires to even access our property. And we noticed that there was not a road already made directly to the property, but that we had 2 easement opportunities that we could make our own road. So after we went and looked at the property and we said, this is the property, I asked my husband, I said, do you give me permission to get the money, to find out how to get this money and to buy this property? And he said, yes. So I was like, so excited for that. So how did I even think about what to do? I started coming up with ideas. What can I do to come up with about $37,000 cash, or $35,000 to $40,000 cash? How do I do that? Did I have that amount of money in the bank? No, I did not. We did not. We had some money in the bank, saved for emergencies. We also had cruises planned for 2025 that we had planned from 2023, and we were going to be saving up for that, for those back-to-back cruises. So I already knew about $16,000 would originally have been saved up for cruises. So right away I said, well, we're canceling that. We're not doing those, because that gives me almost half the money within those 2 years that I could have that money. But how do I get the money now? So I looked into doing a home equity loan. At the time, I wasn't able to get a hold of my mortgage broker. So we ended up getting a personal loan through Discover for home repairs. And they basically approved my husband instantly over the phone. We did the application online. He spoke with them over the phone. They approved him for $35,000, and they had the money in our bank within like a day or two. So we knew we would have that. Now, I did not do that process of applying for that loan until after the negotiation process happened. So what happened there? So now I knew I had some options. I could get a home equity loan or a personal loan. We could have some cash to buy this property, and we could have just enough money to do it. I think Discover was up to 40,000 was how much they were going to do. So I wrote myself a list of questions to ask the realtor. I wanted to know why the seller was selling. I wanted to know if he was willing to come down in price. I wanted to know more about the access road and how much would it cost to put in a road. I wanted to know about the water situation, if there's a local well. Do we haul in water? By us mapping it, we already knew the distance it was from, stores and things like that. We're about a half hour. I'd say more like 45 minutes to like our like main little town, because we count the 30 minutes off the dirt road and then like another 20 minutes or so to like a small town. But I also asked him questions about the zoning. Was there a requirement for the size of home you built? Was there a time frame for when you built? All of these things that I had mentioned in the last video to think about, I wrote down as questions to ask the realtor. The realtor was amazing. He answered every single one of my questions. He knew exactly what he was talking about. He was familiar with the area. He sells property in that particular community as well as a few of the surrounding areas. So I felt very comfortable that this was a legit listing, a legit sale, and that we weren't going to get scammed out of like $35,000, right? So you got to do that due diligence. He had asked me, have you had a chance to look at the property? Otherwise, he was willing to meet us and drive us out there. So again, knowing that there was access to the property is a big thing. Knowing that someone went there and took physical pictures is a big thing. Finding the parcel information, looking things up, doing your research before you even call the realtor, having your questions ready. Those are all very important things, because you don't want to call a realtor and just be like, oh, tell me more about this property. Crickets. You want to know, you want to sound like you know what you're talking about, especially if you're coming in as a cash buyer. You want to know what you're talking about. You want to know what questions to ask, things like that. I hope I covered most of the questions. You can always leave a comment down below of things that you want to talk about. He did recommend that we have a survey done. And I'll talk a whole nother video. We did have a survey done after we purchased the property. And I'll make a separate video on how we went about doing that and finding the company and how much that cost and the time frame and everything, the effort that went into that. But after I talked to the realtor, I basically was like, okay, what would the next steps be, right? What would the next step be? And he said, well, you basically... I said, how would, if we were interested, I got to talk to my husband about everything we spoke about. How would we go about submitting an offer? And he basically said, it was very simple. Everything we did was electronic, right? Phone, email, DocuSign, all of these type of things. Very electronic, Zoom meetings with notaries, things like that. So the first thing he said was, well, you can just shoot me an email or shoot me a text saying your names and what the offer amount is, and then he would draw up the legal form or the official offer letter that he would submit to the seller. So how did I come up with the number to offer? Well, it goes back to that realtor commission. I thought, well, we're not using a realtor. So if we were using a realtor, they would get 5%. So I just subtracted 5% from the asking price, And that's how much I offered, because I thought that's fair. He's already offering less than any of the other properties around, and we're not coming in at asking price or above asking price. We're not looking as desperate, but we did 5% less than asking price. So I believe we ended up purchasing the property for about 33,200 or 300 and something, right? So basically I did that. I provided our names and this is our offer. So he sent me back a DocuSign to sign it saying this is what we were offering, and we were offering a cash offer. And during that time is when we decided to reach out and see if we would get approved for that personal loan. Because if we didn't get approved for the personal loan, we could retract our offer. Now, once the offer was accepted, we had to pay $1,000, what's called earnest money. So basically, it's good faith money saying, hey, here's $1,000. We're serious about buying this property. He said that it would take about a 2-week process. We were set up with a title company that was local to the area we were buying from. And so we worked with that realtor and the title company for all the paperwork and everything that goes through it. So the title company, the purpose of them is they handle that money, they hold on to that money, and then they research the property and make sure there's no liens or anything on there. And you get a list of everything that they find. So you find out what easements you have on there. So we had our road utility easements on there. We do have a watering hole easement on our property because we have the seasonal creek. So there is about an acre worth of our property that we cannot fence off because it needs to be available for livestock and wildlife for the area. And we also have a 50% in mineral rights. So this is all information that the title company is able to obtain, and they send you a copy of all of that. If you agree with the things that are on there and you think everything seems good, then you would be accepting the transaction to move forward. So basically we signed it saying, yep, we agree with that, we're okay with that, we want to move forward with the sale. Same thing, the seller did the same thing. So then it was about getting the funds to the title company, and then the title company is the company that distributes it to the seller and the realtor, if there's any realtor. The realtor we worked with went ahead, he happens to be a broker as well, so he was able to act as a selling and a buyer realtor in this particular transaction. So we did sign another piece of paper saying, yeah, sure, fine. But again, we still offered that 5% less because we didn't consider him really our realtor, but he stepped in as both of them. So he might have got an extra commission, and good for him if he did. But we were really excited that they accepted the offer right away. Now, if they did not accept the offer right away, they might come back and say, nope, no way, we're not accepting it. Or a lot of times they'll come back with a counter offer, and it could be, okay, well, what if you can do this much or that much? So depending on the situation, you may be negotiating back and forth a little bit. Also, if you're dealing with financing or an owner financing situation, you're going to have a lot more involved than just a cash buying situation like our situation was. So once we finished that, we got we had a notary. We did a Zoom meeting with a notary so that they could, check our IDs. We had to send in copies of the IDs. They had to physically be able to see that it was us signing the paperwork, signing the deeds. They needed to know what kind of deed it was going to be. Both of our names were going to be on there, and whether it was going to be a joint type situation, or what ours is considered, we're married, it's considered a survivor type contract. So basically, it's both of our properties, we're married. If one person were to pass away, that person's interest in the property automatically goes to the other person. That's kind of the situation we picked. So they had a few different situations that you can pick. So you'd want to know what type of deed you want. I think we ended up with a warranty deed, and we have the survivorship, the married survivorship type situation on the deed. Now our property is zoned, which is like, I think it's RU10 or something like that, rural area. So it's basically for a rural residential type area. It's listed as vacant land right now because, we have not built any type of permitted houses or livable houses or full-time structures or anything on the property. So it's still considered a vacant land. So that has to do with property taxes. But then it was basically saying our 40 acres could be divided down, but only into 10 acres. So we know in our entire little community there, the smallest acreage is going to be 10 acres, and the biggest one would be, around 40 acres or so. And I liked that idea because some of the other communities that were a little north of us could go all the way down to 1 or 2 acres, which would mean more neighbors, and we wanted a remote place with less neighbors. So again, the realtor, the title company, they're great resources to help you. The county websites are all great resources to help you to answer these questions, to help you with your decision on whether to move forward with that. So once we signed the paperwork and said, okay, this is the sale amount, we're doing it cash only, we then had to wire the money to, it was a local bank near the title company, and there's no cashier check, no personal check, no online check. It had to be an actual direct wire transfer to that bank, and the title company could then distribute the money properly to the seller and the realtor. And then they filed everything with the county, and we were sent copies of the deed and everything like that. So basically, once we signed those papers and we got those copies, when this was our property, we took our daughters to the property to celebrate, and I hired the surveyor. So that was the whole process. It was for us, once finding the property on Zillow, the kind of the research and things that I did, and then the communicating and working with the realtor and the title company, and the seller behind the scenes, if you will, to make this purchase a reality. And I am so happy. I do not have any type of buyer's remorse. We had to put in our own access road. The realtor said it would be probably 10, it could be up to 10 grand for someone to put in an access road for us. My husband and I did it by hand. Is it a straight, obvious road? No, and we like it that way. It does zigzag a little bit, but it stays within, we had 100-foot road easement that we were working with, and it stays within that easement. So if either landowner eventually did move out there, no one's living on those properties right now. If they did ever come out there and they want to make that road more obvious or straight, then so be it. But we like that it's really hard to find our property, but we know exactly where it's at. And then since we've been on the property, we've created 2 other roads, one down to our base camp, which is down by the seasonal creek, and then one which actually goes around and up a ridge, and it has one of the flatter areas, but one of the best views, the second best view on the property, and that's where we plan on building our little bunkhouse. We just finished building our outhouse. So if you missed that video, you can check that one out as well. But if you have any other tips, anything that you've gone through with buying raw land or property or whatever it might be, or if you have any additional questions for me, leave them in the comments below. I hope this video helped you in some way, even if you're just curious as to how we made it happen. But as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.